Good morning, this is Vaughan on the 4th of June. I think it's the 4th of June, I never keep track. But anyway, a lot of people have asked me to show how I make those fish that I use on the outside of my building, which you saw at the beginning of the video. It's fairly straightforward, but a lot of people make these, I'm sure, because I've seen them in the past, that when I used to do craft fairs, I'd seen them. And everybody has a different approach. So here goes. I'm going to position you down so you can see what I'm doing, which means it won't be a good view for me, but you'll see what I'm doing. Now I think I can see the screen and you can see the table. I have some old B-mix here. This is still soft. It's nice if the clay is a little stiffer rather than sort of soft, good enough for throwing. This stuff is a little harder for throwing, I would think. A lot of people have asked about how I cut through my plates, and this is what I use to cut through my plates. It's from England, and it's got little grooves all the way down either side. So you can set this wire up at different thicknesses and cut slabs of different thicknesses, which makes it a very useful tool. The original wire that came with it had a loop here and another loop here, so you could just take it off quickly. But I broke that ages ago, and I just use a guitar string. And this is a thicker guitar string, and the one I use for plates is the thinnest, not quite the thinnest one that you, I think it was 0.12 for cutting through plates. But the thinner you get, the more easily they break. Now, when you're doing fish, what you cut now will determine the kind of size of shape of clay that you're going to get. And I try to cut at an angle. I've got this on a piece of plastic so it spins around a little easier on the table. So I'm going to cut a little thicker than I know I wanted at the end. And so after I've rolled it, and I'm going to get a little wedge shape. So it gets thicker and thicker as you go down. And so this will mean that when it goes on a slab roller, it's already set so that you can actually get the roller to go over this sort of ramp at the beginning. All right, so that's what I'm going to use on the slab roller, but everybody doesn't have a slab roller. So back to high school, guys. When I first started making pottery, they showed me how to do it like this. So here's a piece that's twice as thick as I need, cut straight down, so it's just a straight cut. A little bit of dry clay on the end there. So that's just a straight cut, but it's thicker than I need. So let's move this out of the way. I have a lot of sheets of plastic ready for you. They're all cut to size basically. Make sure your table is clear of any dirt, because whatever's underneath here will show through when you roll. And you place your clay right on the plastic. Do you remember this at high school? God, long time ago. But basically, I got some dirt on this clay. It's not going to matter because they'll get glazed. And you place your clay between the rollers, so the roller edges will sit either side, and you simply roll. Until you can touch the actual sticks either side of you. Now, a slab roller doesn't cost a huge amount of money, but for a small studio it takes up space. So it may not be the best tool for people who have a small studio. So you can still roll slabs pretty easily just doing this. And the wood sets the thickness. And these are 1/4 inch thick. Make sure you don't let one side of the roller go off the wood. You've got to keep it right on there. Now we know it's 1/4 inch thick all the way along. All right, so just these were cut from a board that I got at the hardware store. There was like a 2-foot square board, and I cut a whole bunch of those for my class. Now, I know everybody has a heart attack, but you can pick the plastic up and the clay does not fall off because it's been rolled and it's got stuck big time. So there's your first slab. Now let's set this up a little bit higher now so you can see the slab roller. Okay, my slab roller, who made this one? I don't even remember who made this one. I've got 3 slab rollers, but basically, let's go to this one. Put that down a bit, I don't need that clay. This is your wedge shape that we did. And let's get another piece of plastic. All right, this is not the thinnest plastic. It's thicker than a garbage bag. I buy it in rolls at the hardware store, basically. You have, when you do a slab, and everybody does these differently as well, but the way I've always done it, and it's worked good for me, is to make sure, once again, you've got no dry clay on your bottom canvas, and you place your plastic on the actual slab roller. You place this right at the front of the plastic, leaving about an inch sticking out, so the plastic sheet is about an inch basically this way, so you've got to see a little bit of plastic at the end. You pull your blanket over, and you can feel the clay, then you push the clay with the blankets right up to the roller, so that you can actually feel them tucked in against the roller. The roller is set, this one's not my favorite roller because it has measurements on both sides, and it's set at 1/4 inch, just about. But I actually take into consideration the thickness of the blanket on top and underneath, so I've set it a bit over 1/4 inch so that I'll end up with a slab at 1/4 inch. Now on the other side of the roller itself in the middle, I keep a pile of this blanket so that I can actually pull it. And if you leave too little of this at the edge, right at the point, I've actually had students where they made the blanket go underneath the table into the roller, and that's never a good thing. So basically I can tug this because it's actually right against the roller. And while I'm tugging it, I start the roller and I simply keep going. Never stop. And go back. I like to go both directions. I think it sort of evens out the stress in the clay a little bit. All right. So it's a little less physical. And you got that. So basically, hand rolled, and another was that. Different pieces of clay, obviously. One was wedge shaped. So, but anyway, you've got the idea how to make a slab by hand or with a slab roller. That's step one. Okay, the step two in the slab. Let's lubricate the vocal cords. What do you use for wooden boards in the studio? These are heavier. It's concrete board that they use around foundations of houses. It's about 1/2 inch thick, and this is actual just cheap board that they use in foundations as well. It's wood. I've used both of these, and they've got duct tape on the edges to protect. This one needs to be re-duct taped. But this one has got duct tape on. This has been on for years and it's never come off, but it stops it breaking up at the edges. So basically, you can use either one in the studio, but wood, this is particle board. Obviously if it gets wet, it's going to warp, and I don't know, it just bend a little bit sometimes. I always feel when they get a little bit too damp and wet, wood will warp a little bit. And obviously if you're making tiles or slabs, you don't want your clay to follow that warping. The concrete board never warps. This is a bit more expensive than wood, but I bought several 8x4 sheets of this stuff, and I've made myself a whole bunch of boards of different sizes in the studio that are now 6, 7, 8 years old, whatever, and they're still in good shape. I've used them for painting and things on top of, so they're a little bit worse for wear. But anyway, so the difference is, you know, up to you. You can use both, basically. The concrete board has a slight texture on one side, and on this side it's more of a woven texture. You can choose which you want for the back of your tile, basically. It doesn't really matter because you are going to put a piece of paper on top. Let's tip you down again. Okay, we're going to put a piece of paper on top of this to give yourself a better kind of surface underneath the tile, cleaner. Okay, piece of paper. Your clay slab is simply placed on the paper, and then this is important, don't lift it off like that because it lifts the clay slab back up. Hold it totally flat against the clay and just peel back, and the clay will come off really easily. And the plastic is ready to be reused again. The other side of this, when you're doing pressure and such with the whatever you're going to do to decorate, will actually end up having whatever's underneath here showing through a little bit, but that's the back of the tile or the slab, it doesn't really matter. I never wet when I'm actually working with clay because it's drying out. So I'm basically trying to, you know, get to the right stage all the time with clay. So I try not to add water, but you can dip these in water if you really have to, but I don't think you need to. These are the flexible ribs. You're just using it to smooth your slab out. There we go. To get it as nice as possible, basically. And that is step 2. Here's a tip on rolling a slab. Notice the first 2 that I rolled have a sort of oval shape, and that's because the slab roller seems to push the clay towards the center as it's rolling from the outer edges of a slab to the center, so there's more clay to work with in the middle, so you always get an oval. I figured out a way of getting a square, but it takes a bit of prep. So what I've done, let's show you the profile of this. This slab, I used the rolling pin in the center and I rolled it out a bit wider, and it's thicker at the outer edge on both sides. Now, it's hard to time this, but basically after some experience you should be able to figure out just how much thicker it needs to be on either side rather than in the middle. But let's see what I get with this anyway. So, there's the rolling pin out of the way. So same as before, push it to the top, to where the roller is. So basically you have canvas, plastic, clay with canvas on top. Pull it to the roller and then start rolling. You can do this with the rolling pin and the 2 sticks as we did before as well. Then push it back. It's important, and this may be disagreed with by other potters, but I always like to retrace my steps with rolling slabs so that the pressure built up in the clay from all being pushed one direction is kind of distributed a bit more evenly. And it takes a couple of seconds to do it. So it's not a big deal, basically. All right, now we don't have an oval, we have almost a rectangle, and there was a bit too much clay on the left and right, but like I said, that's hard to judge. So basically, but this is a way to get a squarer slab, and it makes it a little bit wider because you're hammering it left and right to get the clay slab a bit wider. Another one where I actually tried to guess a little bit more accurately, and there you go. We're getting rectangles with just a little extra in the middle there. So I needed to push a bit more from the middle to the outer edges and we would have had a square. Step 3, I've got about 5-6 slabs rolled out, and the next thing is to actually start making some fish. I suggest you go online and take a look at all the different shapes of fish. You can be creative and just make them up yourself, fantasy fish, or you can actually try and make them realistic. I'm somewhere in between, I think. I've done enough of these, so I've just got them, you know, my brain is full, so I'm just going to make it up a little bit. This is my table area, and I have my wheel cart next to me. This is on wheels. My favorite tools that I use all the time are always kept on this, so I know where things are. And so I got some tools that I just set aside that I'm definitely going to use. And I got a pot of water with a cutting knife and a sponge and a couple of brushes if I need them. This clay is very soft, so I shouldn't need them, I don't think. I've just bought this and I've never used it, so maybe I'll try using that. And I still have my little smoothing rib to actually make sure that, you know, the clay is only 15-20 minutes old, so it's still very soft. Alright, I need a pin, a knife or a pin. I should use a blunt one. And there's Mr. Morandi just jumped up to join me as soon as I start talking. Mr. Morandi's come to eat. They eat in the corner over there. But there you go. So just sketch out, old dental tool here. So you just sketch what shape of fish you want to have. I'm going to give one with a couple of big lips at the front. And they're very, these pieces of clay are very small, narrow kind of shape, so I won't be able to get really wide fish out of this one, but just kind of mark it down. You can include the fins if you want to. I'm Morandi. He's gone for a mention. Ooh. But and then go down, and then down. There's a little fin here that some fish have. This one, I'm thinking I might, yeah, I'll just draw this one in anyway. Sometimes I cut them out as separate pieces of clay and stick them on. Have a little bit there. And even enough for the tail. So you can actually draw these out on paper and then put the paper on top and actually just trace them out. That's a very quick way if you're a bit timid about drawing freehand. Once you've done something 2 or 3 times, you just memorize it. But okay, so we have a basic fish shape. So then I'm going to cut it out. I don't destroy the pieces of clay that I've got on the outer edge because I'll reuse those in this piece probably. So when you take one off, you just kind of set it aside carefully. fin, I'm just kind of giving it that kind of wavy look. So I have 2 pieces of usable clay here that I can save. Of course, it's all recyclable, even if I don't use it in here. Go down again. Give this one some spiky fins. And come up again. And just kind of try to do something that's kind of interesting. Okay, so we've got the basic fish cut out, and I just need now to decide what I want to do with all the little spare pieces of clay, because all of these are useful. The fish has a fin in the center there, so I can actually, and there's nothing to stop you at this point making the clay slab a little thinner, because you're going to use it to basically make some additional pieces on top, and so you can actually squash it out a bit bigger. And so I'm going to place it where I want to have it, and then sketch what I think shape I want. And then cut it out. And you know, this, I'm freehanding everything here, but there's nothing to say you shouldn't draw everything out in paper and then just lay it on your clay and just using it like almost like the old-fashioned paper that used to have ink on it that you could make, you could draw on it and it would transfer underneath whatever shape you drew. If you do a piece of paper and a drawing on it and then just press it onto the clay and just press again onto your drawing lines, it will print right onto the clay. Alright, so we have a fin to go on the inside. I've got a little bit of extra clay here, so let's decide if I want to have an extra flap in here. Oh, we need an eyeball. Of course, for an eye, take a coin, press it down, take it off. Easier said than done, I guess. But, and then just cut around your little circle. So we got a, right, and I have a stamp with a spiral. We could make him like a 1965 fish. And then also, I mean, I'm just playing here with making things up a little bit because you can do anything. So basically, I'm just kind of just trying to make up some stuff that's going to go on this fish. They have that little kind of shape around their eyes. So I'm just cutting that. Just positioning at the moment. Oh, the lips. I think we could do something with those lips too. So we could actually make them more three-dimensional. Place this on top. Somebody said the lips look heart-shaped when they bought one of my fish once, and they were buying it because of that feature. I never thought about that when I did it. And then basically just cut out that little heart shape. Press it on there. If you want to do the, I've already got one of the fins up there, you want to make something like a spiky, I can't remember the name of the fish, stickleback. We used to have a stickleback in England. So I can give this fish some ribs. Whoops. Be careful what you do with your knife. It's nice when clay is this soft, because you can repair anything you do too. So giving some ribs, you could even do the same down here too. Cover up these little pieces of clay with another coil. So really, anything goes. You can just make it all up. I like to just round off the edge each time. That's what I'm doing. I pull it off the clay. Okay, got that. And then we have the tail thing here as well. The fish, there's that little kind of shape in a fish that kind of sticks out into the tail area, so I'm going to put that down there and say that's where I'm going to have that. Okay, so I think that will be enough just to get started with all the shapes, just to make the body more interesting. So then I'm going to take this off and I'm going to use one of my stamps. I can use this one, this would work nicely, or I could even go with the little spirals that I have here. I mean, you can really do anything, so let's choose one. And the little scales. And I find it easy to just rub it on my jeans, which are a little dusty, just to kind of help it so it doesn't stick too much. When this stamp starts to stick, I can turn it round a little bit too. But it really does help if you have something dusty on you. An old rag that's been around the studio a little bit. Gathering dust. Don't tell the health inspector. Yeah, we live in dust. I got 47 years in this dust. And that's why I love summer, because you can open the windows, the doors, and get all that dust outside. But I have had 47 years of not smoking, so my lungs shouldn't be too bad. Where I grew up, it was a coal mining area in Yorkshire. And the air, I was talking about this with somebody the other day, the air, when I used to drive up from college in Bristol in England, the air would actually smell and taste of coal dust and iron. And then years later, I went back, and of course all the coal mines, all the steel industry mostly as well, but it's all gone. I mean, I think it all went to China. Great for them because they got all those jobs, but they also have the health stuff, probably now that England had in the last century, emphysema and all those diseases. Makes you wonder about the future, because the global economy is so dependent on each other, but now everybody's looking at that thinking maybe we should have more manufacturing capacity in our own countries. But all that dust and smell of coal will be back in Yorkshire. Hopefully not. Yorkshire's a beautiful county. If I ever went back to England, that's the place I'd move to. Move that guy out of the way again. Alright, so we've got all that stuff in there. So what did I have these little pieces for? So I get a brush and I simply wet them so they've got a little bit of ability to create slip. Place them in a position I want them and just press them down and work them in. You can use a brush to do this. I have a sponge to dry my brush on too. And you can work that in. Using the ferrule of the brush. And the same down here. I guess with these ones what I can do is just wet the actual fin and stick them all back down on that. So basically, to speed things up, wet that. If the clay is really soft, you can do a lot of time-saving stuff basically. And then very carefully I press them down, so I'm not moving them. Otherwise, if I slide the brush along, it might move the little piece of clay. And then after you know you've got it down, you can actually just brush down the piece. And then the fin that's going in the center, this one, let's see if I can find the right tool. This one has a shape like that, so I can actually create what appears to be like the fins, the little flaps, whatever, overlapping. And then wet the area where you want it to stick to the other piece of clay, which is going to be around about there. So I'm wetting both sides, even though this clay is really, you know, still only about 40 minutes old. I've had to stop a couple of times in the video because we had customers. So basically, moving it around, pressing down. You can then put the brush underneath a little bit. Well, actually, let's give them a bit of smoothing first. So I'm just getting them smooth before I lift them. And just to create the feeling of movement a little bit in the water, I lift them up a touch. So they do kind of have that feeling of overlapping a little bit. There you go, just a different way of positioning them. Then the eye, just wet it underneath a little bit. Sit your finger on there. And if you didn't put the spiral in earlier, you could now put it in and that would be enough pressure to make it stick anyway. Same with the lips, wet the area here. And then press it down so that it tends to take the shape a bit better of the actual clay underneath, because it wasn't cut very precisely. Same thing with this tool again. I can actually cut it up and create that kind of feeling of the bottom lip overlapping a little bit. So I make these pieces for the front of the studio because it's supposed, you know, in retail, it's hard to get somebody to stop. So if you can get somebody to slow a car down from 50 kilometers an hour, you're doing a good job. because it's hard. I mean, people are driving along, they don't need to stop and they see something. And it depends on what they're seeing, but hopefully you've got something that the person finds interesting and eye-catching, so brighter colors. And that's why I'm a gardener, I guess, as well, because and I think the gardening actually is part of my success, that I've actually managed to get people to stop for the garden too. Now I'm going to make a slightly deeper carving line. Location, location, location in business, of course, everyone's heard that. But I also think you've got to have that eye-stopping kind of visual to make people stop. A bit of clay carved off, and then we've got to wet it again, smooth it a touch. So I've made this fin a little deeper. I can't remember which one I had here actually, but anyway, I'm going to roll that point. And then this one too, just give yourself that little point at the top edge. So I've got the water underneath where I'm sitting them to help make them stick. And it'll dry fairly fast, so you've got to put these down fairly quickly to do the last one. I'll have to get this bit here because I need a little short piece. Same again, you basically wet the brush, press down. So this will give this whole, like this was just one layer on top, now I've got this feeling of almost like 3 layers because of the little depth that I cut out. Gives it a little bit more depth. That's basically all I was looking for. And then this part, you can smudge it down to help it look like it's part of the body. Shouldn't look like it's attached. Everything should look like it's growing out of that body there. The finial of the brush, no, yeah, the finial of the brush. Finial? No, got that wrong actually. Ferrule. The ferrule of the brush is a good sculpting tool. And then this one is small, so I'm just going to basically give myself some lines. Same down here. And then one up here, I'm just going to do that same flow thing to make it look like one's overlapping the other. Just remember to save all your bits of clay because they're not waste. And then just kind of brush down hard with the brush to make this all smoother. Same with your other fins a little bit. Remember, clay may be soft now, but when it's dry and after it's fired, it becomes really sharp if you have little bits of sharp clay, or little bits of bumps basically. You've got to make sure it really does stay smooth at the edges. And then basically, let's get to another tool. I'm not happy with the line here, so I'm going to try and even this up a bit. Left hand work. I'm not ambidextrous, I just feel like it's easy to hold this for you to see. It's funny how bad I feel like with this hand. Can I really do anything with my left hand? And then the face up here, it's almost done, really, basically. Oh, I still got to put my little face shape in here too. I have that little curve of clay. I think I used part of it up, but I can roll it a bit thinner. And before I put this guy on, I'm going to wet it all the way down so it gets it a bit softer. And then where it's wet, just bend it around a little bit. And then try to stick it down a little bit. There's a bit of pressure because it was wet clay on wet clay, so it should stick quite nicely. Turn this back around so I can use my right hand. When you mark clay, if you use a point of something, it makes big gouges. So if you've got a wide area of your tool, it's better to use that than the narrow point of the tool, because you'll have all the extra cleaning up to do. And then of course you can just kind of take the tool, you may as well use the brush to do this part there. And then the same over here. Right, so then we get the brush again to make this smoothing out. Okay, I think we're basically close. Okay, what do we have? Do we have a fish that's finished or not? Okay, so you can see we have a fish. I have to drill holes to hang this on the wall, so I will probably drill a hole in that area there, but not until it's almost dry. And then I'll probably drill another one in there. And then basically you just add 2 thin screws and it will fit on the wall. I was just thinking that this area here, where's that other stamp? And I'm just going to dab a little water on there. This is where I'm going to have the screw probably, so I'm going to make it a little thicker there. So I'll have a hole here and I'll dribble right through it, so you won't see a spiral, but it gives a little thickness just there. So when I put a screw through it, it should be a little bit more durable, because I've had them snap when I drill a hole if I'm not really careful. So, you know, a fish. Not that hard at all, fairly simple. I'm going to make 4 more. I'll take pictures of them all, and then you can see it. Okay, I have finished all 5 of these slabs. I carved them in similar ways, but making sure everyone is different. So let me give you a quick look. Buttons applied in the center there. I had a texture, that rubber rib I showed you with the little gouges out of it. I used for the bottom. And I used stamps for actually these little spirals. So a whole bunch of carving and some applique of different pieces of clay on the surface. These are sort of middle-sized ones. I do them much larger than this a lot of the time. But there's another one with a little baby fish attached to the mother fish. So applique, where you make a piece of clay, slab one, and use this, like I showed you in the video, just apply it to the surface, but with lots of textures, all using the stamps that I have myself and just ribs. And this one is the biggest one lengthwise. Same type of thing with all the applique on it. And then this one is the smallest one I did. Same type of thing with all the textured stamps. Another irritating little job about these fish is that you put them on newspaper to stop them from actually sticking to the board as you're texturing the clay. But the newspaper dries and wrinkles while it's drying. So you have to be able to get them off the newspaper, and it's timing. You don't want to do it when the clay is too dry because it might crack. You don't want to do it when the clay is too soft because they'll bend as you're doing it. So you just have to do it right in the middle of that, time period. And if you look down here, I haven't done any of these. I've got weights on them so that they can try and control the actual bending a little bit because of the newspaper. So I basically just put weights on them overnight. And that can still, may not work. There's another one over here as well. I got them all weighted a little bit. There's also some frames above there that we make in clay, and we have to weight those too. So these ones at the back there, that one's dry now, but anyway, so what I end up doing, and it's a little bit tedious, and it's don't have a cup of coffee. I try to pull them to the edge like this and pull the paper down as I'm doing it, and you've got to try and see whether it bends. It's not bending, so I've got a good period of dryness, whatever, and I'm spreading my hand out as much as possible so I can pull the paper out and put it back down. And now I can put the weights back on, and that will prevent it from bending anymore. And these are just broken bits of kiln shell. And that one's lifted up just a little bit because it was so far stuck out that I've got to be very careful not to stick a too heavy a weight there because it will crack it off. But basically that should just be done either the same day, much later in the same day, or the next morning. Just don't let them dry out too much. This is one of the fish pieces, and I've got 12 of these to glaze. That I did during the videos. I actually had, I can't remember how many I did, but it was a lot. This is out of a paper clay. I think it's B-Mix 5 paper clay. I'm not sure, I'd have to look at what I ordered, but this is so light. I mean, it doesn't weigh anything. I mean, I guess that's because the paper's all burnt out, which takes up volume in the clay. But I thought I'd try it to see if it stays flat, and it stayed pretty darn flat. So it's an experiment with the paper clay. Okay, the fish are just very difficult to glaze, and that's kind of a good thing in a way because it's nice to be creative when you're doing something like this too. So basically, my favorite word, I got a big fish which is too big to go in any of the buckets, and I do not want to get glaze on the back of this because it's going on a kiln shell. So I just pour. It's important when you're glazing to stir every bucket before you dip something. Because glazes settle out, and some of them settle out really quickly. And I use a couple of things to thicken glazes, but vinegar is one of them, and it makes a glaze smell after a while, so that's a disadvantage of that. And then you can just use Epsom salts too, but I've actually felt like airbrushing Epsom salts is a problem too because it crystallizes back out in the glaze and will end up blocking up your airbrush if you're spraying glazes. But anyway, all I do is pick 3 glazes that I think will look good at the beginning. See if you can see, and I just pour, trying not to let it go down the back of the piece. And it's inevitable that some will go down the back. I've got a little hollow area in there, so I've got to get that filled up and let it pour out. So basically, cleaning these up after glazing is always a bit of a problem, because some of it will go down the back, and you just have to wipe it off and choose how many coats you want. This actually glazes a sort of crystally green glaze, which I think looks pretty good on the fish. So you can kind of guide yourself carefully. And then this one here is in the Cone 6 Glazes book. That's a recipe of my own. But basically this one is just variegated blue. So I'm trying to follow my carving, my mottling and texturing. Now variegated blue runs, so I don't want to get it too thick. That was quite a bit of glaze there. Now the other coat that I did on first is now dry enough to touch. So I then go into my blue. Same thing, just trying to be careful. If I want it to overlap, it's nice as well, but this one I didn't really want it to overlap much, so I'm just trying to do it as carefully as I can, getting that filled up area again. And this one is just bright blue. I think it's called floating blue in the actual book. This one I don't mind getting thicker because it gets just darker blue. And it doesn't run very much. So that's the base of the glaze. So I've got 3 coats there. And this now just has to dry for a while. Okay, so the fish is basically dry enough so I can start painting on it. So we've got 3 different areas on here. So all I've been doing at this point is brushing, just using a Japanese paintbrush to glaze onto where I want to have a darker green. This is basically my it's not seafoam, it's matte turquoise glaze. So I'm just basically painting in. I've got a bowl of glaze here, and there's just using the, like any kind of, like I did the flower painted pieces, actually you're just using the brush to hold the glaze and just kind of, you let the glaze flow off. You don't want to press hard. Glaze is basically flowing off the brush. So it's not enough to drip off, it's just enough to flow. So you can add glaze onto pieces just by painting like this, as long as you don't oversaturate the area. Another thing you can do with glazing, I have a whole bowl full of sponges that I've melted basically using a soldering iron. I've created patterns in the sponge to actually dip into glaze and then dab onto glazeware. And so these sometimes are simple, other times they can be quite elaborate, but basically if you put them in water so they're soft, and then you dip them into glaze, you can then add a sort of textural quality to an area on the piece that you're sponging. Whether the little pattern shows up depends on how much glaze you have on the thing. If you just want to use it for a mottling texture, or if you want to create the actual pattern that's on the sponge, that is something you determine yourself. I just want a texture with this. Another thing you can do with glazing is you can use slip trailers or these little bottles containing glaze, which you then just very carefully dribble where you want it to be. So here we go, let's have a look at this piece. I'm making this stuff up here, so this is black, which I have to be very careful of. Let's test it to make it's coming out fast. Yeah, so come on, here we go. It will spurt out sometimes, so you've got to be a little careful. If you squeeze it, it will flood out, so you've got to be very careful. Ooh, that was lucky. And that was very lucky too. With glazes they melt, so it's actually not quite as bad as it looks sometimes, but you still got to be careful. And this one is Cranberry, which is in the Cone 6 Glaze book. So this is another one glaze that I try to be very careful with, because I think it actually looks okay when it's small elements of something, but not when it's dramatic on something, like all over. And of course, when you've got slip trailers, you can actually dot if you want to. Dots are very, you have to be careful too. You can overdo that. So, so let's see what we have here. Let's give it a little bit down here. This one's flowing just nicely. So really, let's see, give it a little bit in there. And then another thing you can do, if you get a nice firm sponge, let's see if we can find something firm enough in here. Dip it in water. These are like car washing sponges. Maybe it should have more water than that. Because you can actually rub glaze off. So I've got green here, blue there, and I'm simply rubbing over the two so that the middle of the fish there, you'll see a bit more texture when you actually fire it, because the glaze is still in the crevices. But I'm not going to do that all the way up, just in the middle area, just to wipe some glaze off. And one thing you should try to avoid is actually scraping glaze off that causes a lot of dust, because even though you think it's falling on the floor or something, it might be, you know, bringing it up into the air so that you end up breathing some of that in. So that wouldn't be good. But remember, the glazes contain heavy metals. Thinking about it, look at how detailed I carved that sponge. If I had a smooth fish here, I would just simply stamp with that. So I don't want to wear out that part of my sponge here either. I'm just thinning the high points where the glaze is. It'll give it a little kind of light color of clay breaking through in that location there. And I think that's probably enough. You know, then the part that I really hate is I have to get all the glaze. Let me tilt you down a bit. I have to get all the glaze off the edges, because if I don't, it's really hard to sponge in a little area like that. So I really don't like doing this part of it, because I've actually broken pieces in the past doing it like this as well. And this clay is so light, as I'm saying. But I simply go around with this. This is one of the metal ribs, and it's been worn out. And it's got grooves, so I've got to be careful. I use those grooves on some pieces. But you've got to be careful that you don't actually get one of those grooves and then go into under the other side of the piece. Now you can, if you want to do it, wax resist the edges of all these. That would work too. But you handle them a lot when you're glazing, and so I worry about getting the wax from your fingers onto the piece where it's not supposed to be. So it's I've decided that waxing would take a long time on the edges, because you've got to be careful not to get it on the front of your piece. And I would hate that too. So basically what I do is I spend a lot of time just lightly getting the majority of it off. Like it takes very little time, but it's actually taken me a long time to get all the glaze off. And I've been all the way around now, so we're done. So then you take your sponge, making sure it doesn't dribble down the front of the piece. So I wrung it out quite a bit there, but I've left some water on it. I'm brushing away, instead of towards, I'm brushing away from the edges, so that I'm not going to scrape the sponge on the edge and make a dribble of water go down the front of the piece. And I'll turn it over at the end and see if I was good. If I pull it in like that, it'll scrape water off the sponge and make it stick to the piece, run down the piece. Make sure there's no glaze there. Alright, so let's see how good I was. I'd say 10 out of 10. There you go. So we'll see what that looks like after the firing.